everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Bullis Show. Today with me, Camela Thompson. Now, Camela is the Vice President of Marketing at CaliberMinds, the leading B2B platform for revenue insights you can trust. She is based in Seattle, which is a beautiful city. I have been there before and even been on ferries in Seattle. Camela spent 15 plus years in revenue operations in the tech industry in successful startups such as Qumulo, Extrahop, and CDK Global, before proving herself as a customer-first growth marketer. She is deeply familiar with the pain points that operations teams face in the marketing sector and is passionate about helping operations professionals accelerate their careers. In addition, she hosts CaliberMinds podcast, the Revenue Marketing Report, where she produces expert-fueled content developed to helping B2B marketers hone their craft. She used to run her own consultancy, where she specializes in creating customer-centric brand narratives. She also serves Chief Marketing Advisor for Shepard Search Partners. Sounds like a bit of SEO in there somewhere. Mm-hmm. And expert advisor of Revenue Ops Co-op, and volunteers as a marketing coach for under-resourced entrepreneurs through Urban Impact Seattle. So welcome to the show, Camela.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So what people didn't see is that I didn't hit record initially, but at any rate, that's okay. We've managed to hit record today, and my editors will actually find something when I upload a file. So anyway, 120 podcasts and counting. It's the first time I haven't hit record before, so we had to start again. So
for the best of us.
So Camela, tell us what got you into operations initially, and I believe that you've sort of extended that now, because operations is not solely stick up your hand and go, I want to be in operations. So tell us a bit about how you had the call to get into operations initially.
Yeah. And as you said, I did not raise my hand and say, I want to be in operations. I kind of stumbled into it. So starting in university, it was really clear that I would have a problem picking somewhere to be because I really loved creative and I really loved science, math, specifically statistics, storytelling with data. So trial and error ended up being a Salesforce administrator and getting into the analytics side. And what I found is that there's boundless amounts of creativity you need to tap into as an operations professional, in particular in running systems on a very tight budget with our technology startups, figuring out what are the absolute minimum data points you need to be able to run a business efficiently, and then figuring out how to manage up and communicate to the executive team in a way they'll listen and influence their decisions about what they do next. Because what we see a lot of times is people feel something in their guts. They've had really strong positive or negative experiences. Those stick in their minds. And it's very hard to change minds with data. A lot of times you have to change their minds with stories. So uncovering that in operations actually was a pretty good lead in into marketing, I found.
Right. Yeah. So most entrepreneurs, operations are seen as a necessary evil and quite often it's avoided because they don't like that attention to detail. And also, there's always been attention. I used to be a salesperson first, initially after being a teacher. So I got into sales and tech, and there's always this tension between sales and marketing. There seemed to be a disconnect. So because basically marketing would say we're not getting enough business from the salespeople, and the salespeople we're not getting enough support from the marketing people because they're not giving us enough leads. So there used to be that tension. But in terms of what's happened in the last 20 years is we've moved into digital marketing, which is a totally, well, it's not a totally different beast. The fundamentals are still the same. Mm-hmm. So, and you would have been playing much more in the digital marketing space, wouldn't you, in the last, 15 plus years, because digital marketing's been around about that long, really, isn't it? I'd say. Yeah. So, when did you move from operations per se, Salesforce, and Salesforce is quite a beast, isn't it, in terms of making it sing and dance?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what got you into marketing more? Was it because it was sort of that creative aspect that you liked? In other words, you mentioned storytelling, for example.
Yes. I grew increasingly frustrated arguing over what I viewed were arbitrary numbers as opposed to these big sweeping patterns I saw that made more sense to focus on. For example, I was in a meeting, we were talking about MQLs quarter over quarter, we're talking about 400s. And there was a big debate about why the number had changed from what we had previously reported the prior quarter by a quantity of 5 units. And I grew so frustrated with missing the big picture and looking at a website that talked about features and wasn't aligning with what the clients were looking for in terms of problem solving. And they want to spend more time with their kids. They want to get that time back. They want job security. And we're talking about cloud-based, hybrid, fundament. I mean, just all these words that were kind of a word salad.
Yep.
I just grew more and more frustrated. And as a technical buyer, I can't tell you how many times I had male salespeople ask for the technical guy and start explaining to me why I needed the product in a way that was really abrasive. So I finally reached the point where I said, this doesn't seem to be working well for me. Why don't I try my hand at copywriting and branding and see if I can't bring something new to the table? And fortunately, it worked out for me.
Right. Because you are quite creative. You've actually written fiction as well, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So what fiction? Let's a little bit segue here. So what sort of fiction do you write?
Dark urban fantasy, thrillers, murderish, not true crime, but definitely false crime, very dark stuff, which is funny because I'm actually a pretty friendly, bubbly person. It has to come out somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously creative, because you've got to, basically a story starts with imagination and then you've got to act on it, and that's called creativity, which means putting pen to paper. Yeah. So sounds like you brought that from what you're doing with operations. So you work for CaliberMinds. What do you see as some of the biggest challenge for marketing professionals? In other words, going from, okay, so we need to get, marketing needs to produce a range of different things. One is brand awareness is one. Mm-hmm. Then it's like lead generation is another. So in terms of CaliberMinds, what you guys do, where do you fit in the picture in terms of the technology? Because technology is very important to help you scale. So tell us a bit about CaliberMinds and the process you take customers through, I suppose is the best way. So people and listeners can understand what you guys do and what's important.
So I'm going to give a little background into what I'm seeing people struggle with, and then I'll move into the product. But what I'm seeing marketers struggle with, as we mentioned, digital marketing's been around 10, 15 years. Unfortunately, the perception of executive teams is that anything digital is 100% trackable. And anybody who's been paying attention, especially lately, we have privacy first design. We have a lot of legislation that we have to be aware of. There's a lot of things getting in the way of marketers tracking things. And also on the B2B side, we're dealing with buyer committees. It's not just one person in an account. And everybody thinks of the demand generation funnel and this Plinko effect where people are just naturally cascading down in a linear fashion. And B2B buyers are like a bunch of squirrels on Skittles running all over the place in and out of the funnel. They lose their budget comes back. It just doesn't work that way. No. So what we've done at CaliberMinds is we connect to all the different data sources and then unify the account and contact. And so you have a continuous timeline, which is super powerful. We're also extremely realistic in how we look at that data. So by that, I mean, a lot of attribution vendors in the past have sold attribution as the silver bullet that'll tell you exactly what's happening in marketing. And like you said, awareness is a huge piece of marketing. And a lot of that is word of mouth. And that's something, even in our digital world, you really can't track without getting some kind of qualitative feedback, like opportunity interviews or actually talking to the customer. So what we do is we connect to the systems, we unify the data, and then we give you an estimate and help coach you through how to speak to the rest of the business on what is and isn't trackable, and then give you those data points that you can use to help adjust your marketing. So when a person signs up with us, we talk through, okay, which are your core systems? What do you use for digital advertising? What are the other pieces you use for direct mail and all of these other things you're doing? We connect all those pieces together. We work with people to implement best practices to make sure that data is there to be collected in the first place. And then we go from there. So it's a pretty exhaustive but fruitful process.
Right. So yeah, and as you mentioned it, you talk about the consumer is like this random rabbit running around madly, and they come in, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs see, and it's used. The trouble is the words we use to describe the marketing funnel. It sounds like a linear process.
It's just not.
No, for me, I call it the matrix.
That's fair. That's fair.
Because
Yeah, it's
because you bring them in from all customers come in at different ways. They come in for different reasons, and we're trying to apply science and linear and edges and straight lines to human behavior. And as we know, human behavior is messy because it's humans. It's organic. So what are the different data points you're trying to collate to make sense of it all? Because basically you're trying to make sense so you can make good decisions to improve your marketing, correct?
yes,
Yep.
absolutely.
So what are some of the data points that you think are really important and is pretty typical of, and we're talking more B2B here, which is still human to human, but so what are the data points?
So one of the examples that I've used recently that has helped me tremendously with CaliberMinds own marketing is we have a web tracker for people who have cookies enabled, and we can tie that back to company and persona. And I can actually see in a sales cycle which personas are hitting our content and different pieces of material when. And the reason why that's been so powerful for me is that we thought we were selling to marketing operations, and we noticed CXO VP level are who come in first. And then they ask marketing operations to come in and run the process from there. Our website wasn't optimized for that executive level. We were talking in very technical terms that resonated with marketing operations. And we're currently going through a process to change that. But we've already seen tremendous improvements in things like bounce rate, time on page, and how people are moving around. So we're taking something very, very fundamentally creative and figuring out what copy resonates. So we're still throwing the spaghetti against the wall, but we have a tool now where we can measure the impact and whether or not we need to adjust and make corrections from there. So it's still a total blend of art and science, but I love having that science there to even realize I have a problem so I can go fix it.
Right. So you mentioned the term persona. Tell us what you would describe the meaning of persona.
Okay. For me, it has a lot to do with position and department, although I would love to hear if you disagree with that. So for me, somebody in marketing operations is going to care about very different things than somebody who's a CMO. So differentiating between the two and seeing when they come into the sales cycle and what influential points that they tend to pull on, that's really important for me.
Is that the customer? Is that what you mean by the persona?
Yes.
Customer persona.
On the buyer committee. So usually there's 8 people there. I want to know who those 8 people are and when they get involved.
Okay. So you're talking about fairly complex high-end sales?
Yes. So usually over 50K, you've got a long sales cycle that's typically 60 plus days.
Right. Okay. Right. So we're not talking about someone like just one person making a buying decision from one company. You're talking about, yeah.
Yeah. I wish, because that would make my job a lot easier.
So because you're doing that, collecting that's easier to connect. But if you've got sort of like you're trying to target a persona in a particular marketplace, and it's just one decision maker, you have to collect a fair bit of information about them, don't you, to be able to say this fits the persona we think is our sweet spot. Yeah. Because you're going to go, well, buyer's going to be works professional services. She earns $200,000 a year. She comes from a developed country. She has 2 children, a cat, has a mortgage, and she's married, for example, or has a partner. So that's sort of like, and I have heard personas being used as well. That's a little bit. Personas are just, this is our typical person, but some people are starting to use more things like psychographics. In other words, what are the problems you're trying to solve as well? And you try and attach that to a persona. Like, what are their pain points? Why are they buying this?
That's
Yeah.
exactly what we're trying to dig into. And the way that we try to get to, well, it's multi-pronged. We do a lot of interviewing. We do a lot of discussions, but we also can see what content's being consumed, what keywords they're using, how they're actually making it to the page. So there's a lot of detail we can get in what they're interested in and what draws them in initially. And that can help us answer some of those questions about pain points and what are we trying to solve? Because a lot of our content is thought leadership based. It's not about the product. So we can get into what's motivating them to make a change in the first place.
Right. So as just thinking about that, if they come to your website, can you track what search term they use to come to, or is it you can actually from Google?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So what's the tech involved in that? So that's Google's data.
So we connect directly to Google Analytics, and a lot of this is dependent on cookie exception and all these other pieces. So we use Google Analytics, but we also pair that with a web tracker that's JavaScript that's installed on the site. And it puts a first-party cookie on that person's browser to identify them. What that allows us to do is actually capture what they've clicked on or what they've searched to get to the page, the referring URL, and then stitch that together throughout their interactions for that day. Right. So we're not dropping that they came in through paid search after they clicked to another page. That's actually persisting throughout that day.
Yep.
And then the next day when they come in via direct, that persists as well.
So you're collecting data from paid search, not organic search? Is that more in
both?
Both.
All of it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that was an example, but the web tracker it functions regardless of where they came from, but what it's doing is it's capturing where they came from. And then because we tie back to Google Analytics and they track terms and other pieces of information, we can actually stitch that all together.
Right. Okay. So you're taking a lot of noise and distilling it to making a lot of sense.
Yes, that's the goal.
Okay. So if you engage with a customer, what's your typical process? So, and for my edification as well as for our listeners, is what would be your process in engaging with a client that is a B2B and they're buying a solution that's over $50,000? So that's typically what you're targeting at. So how would you onboard them, and then what is the process from there, just at a high level?
Right. So the first step is determining which systems we need to pull data from. So what do they have already pushing into Salesforce? Can we leverage information that they already have in a single point so we don't have to connect to a bunch of different points? Within the first 2.5 weeks, they have access to attribution reports that are on par with our competitors. We connect to their CRM and marketing automation platform within the first 24 to 48 hours. And then beyond that, it can be up to 8 weeks of our time. It's 4 hours per week of their time, determining where their common data flaws are and how we should set up fixing it. For example, if they have a proliferation of duplicates, we can actually fix that and push the fixed information back into their core systems. Or if they have a bunch of records that should be converted onto an account, so you have continuous history, we can actually do that for them. So that's what takes a bit longer time.
Right. Okay, so basically you work out which technology they're using,
Hmm.
and then you clean up, then you connect that all to CaliberMinds,
Yes.
and then you, once you've put that all together, you then start collecting data, and then you start cleaning up the data,
Hmm.
and then from that, then you start producing reports. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So what would those reports look like?
So, uh, because we collect so much data,
Yep.
there are a lot of options. At a high level, we have an executive dashboard view that shows you total pipeline bookings, what marketing contributed, and what the key sources are that came from, whether it's uh, in-person events or form downloads or demo requests. We have that all broken down. Then we have reporting that's specific to functional group that goes into more detail. For example, content marketing. A content marketer can see what the top pieces are and which personas and industries are interacting with those content pieces, so they can understand whether or not what they're producing is resonating with their intended audience.
Right. Okay. Um, so, in terms of like in terms of persona, are you collecting information that says, so we think we're targeting, persona A, but we're end up, but our buyer's persona A plus one or B. Does the data tell you that as well?
Yes. So, provided the information exists to pull from. And what I mean by that is, as people visit the site and provide their information, are you enriching it? We still need those data enrichment tools to come in and provide additional information. Provided you are doing that, yes, we tie everything back to the account and we can say, we understand you thought it was this one person interacting, but we're seeing an average of 8 people interacting with any sale. And here are the typical personas that do that.
Right. Okay. So, what are some of the biggest challenges you see for your customers?
Being overwhelmed by the sheer amount of data that's available to them, and then learning how to translate that into next steps.
Right.
I think because so much of what we do is digital, we're producing a huge amount of data all the time.
Yep.
And it can be very hard to know what to tackle first.
Yep. So, what are some of the results? So, overwhelm is a thing that you help. Like initially, they are in overwhelm, but your idea is to take them from overwhelm to making sense of it and feeling they're in control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, what you guys do at CaliberMinds is essentially take all this noise and, as we said, and turn it into making sense of it. So, we're talking about reports as well. And also, I think we're talking about personas in terms of do you identify and refine through the journey and reports that and getting to testing where you actually find that the persona you thought you were targeting is actually quite different or is different.
Mm-hmm.
Does your system help you do that?
Yes, absolutely. So what we've noticed is a lot of companies are reliant on data entry and Salesforce from salespeople to tell them who the personas are.
Yep.
When we can actually see who's interacting, we do a lot of myth busting.
Right.
So we're looking, we know who the primary point is with sales. That's pretty easy to get to. But understanding all of the people going to your website to do research, all the people on the buyer committee, all those people involved in the ultimate decision, that's really key. So knowing, for example, finance or IT hits your website at the end of the sale, probably looking for security review and ROI calculators. If you know that, you can get in front of it and actually create the content they're looking for to create less friction in your sale.
Yeah, because part of what we're doing is we've just launched a new product, premium newsletter, monthly subscription, and whenever you start a marketing enterprise, you're actually, no matter, you can research and survey till the cows come home, but the only truth is what the customer does.
Yes.
That's the ultimate point of truth. Are they buying or they're not?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So yeah. And that's a real challenge. And then you end up sort of in this and I'm having it now. We're trying to work out. Okay, we're going to target these two personas to help us in our guidance or the messaging. We want to make sure that the messaging goes from the ad to the sales page to, to them signing up. They can become a lead, or are they a buyer? And is it making sense? And if it makes sense and it's hitting the right pain points, well then, voila, you're going to make some money. So it's not that simple really, but it sounds like it. But the challenge is getting that messaging right through. It's sort of, we think of it as humans as a funnel, as we said before. But people come, they read something, they go away, they might come back, and you can't see that often.
Yes. Yeah. Which is why I love having this technology personally as a marketer, because a lot of our customers, they go from the company thinking they influence 20% of the deals to 80%. And that's because we can actually see all of those touches and say, actually, it took 20 marketing touches before they could even get to sales. And here are the 5 people involved before then. Being able to point to the data is kind of proving out what we already suspected as marketers. It just isn't an easy job. We know that. So, yeah.
And I think the challenge as a marketer is trying to make the journey as simple as possible, even though it's messy.
Yes.
And removing friction points. So, for example, one of the challenges we've had is, and even when they've bought the product, they keep stop churn, because to reduce churn is also a sales marketing job as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, if you're getting 20%, 30% churn rates every month, you're in trouble.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you're delivering a product such as a pre-newsletter, is to make sure that people stay, that they can read it easily. They don't have to do too many clicks. 1, to buy, 2, to consume the information and content. So it is messy, and sometimes I feel overwhelmed just going, oh God. But the thing is, the only way you learn is by doing.
Yes.
In other words, you've got to say, okay, can we A/B split test? Can we just change the headline? Will that make a difference? But if you change 2 things at the same time, you don't know which is working, which isn't.
Exactly.
Yeah. So digital is great, but boy, it can be overwhelming.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
So just to wrap things up then, what are some of the biggest challenges that you guys solve? And we think we've touched on some of them, just to sum it up. And then how can people contact CaliberMinds and yourself if they want to have more of a discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the number one thing I want marketing leaders to walk away with is the ability to speak intelligently to their board in terms they understand. So if they can prove what's working and what isn't by actually opening up sample accounts and getting buy-in from the rest of the executive team, it turns that, we always joke that the quarterly board meeting is that quarterly interview to keep your job. It makes having a conversation with executive leaders who think in very linear, funnel terms much simpler. So that's the biggest thing I think we solve, is the ability to speak intelligently about the data and defend what you're doing. And I don't think many tools out there can do that.
Right.
To find us, CaliberMind.com. I'm Camela at CaliberMind.com. And you can also catch us on the Revenue Marketing Report.
Great. Well, thanks, Camela, for revealing the messiness of digital marketing and getting to the truth of digital marketing's complexity. But what's great is you guys are about distilling that noise into reports that make sense and deliver results that help people grow their businesses. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Sounds like your journey has been a bit messy, writing fiction along the way. Is that still is that a side hustle?
Not anymore. It's not a very profitable side hustle for those of you considering it.
Okay, number 1 tip: don't do writing fiction as a side hustle, because it's a bit. I know writing a book is always like, will this be a hit or not, and it's really difficult to know.
A million titles published a year. Your odds aren't very high, but you could still try it.
Well, sounds like you enjoy writing, but thanks very much for your time, Camela, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you so much.